Welcome to the Scottish Misfits channel. Today we learn about a legend of motorsport to me the GOAT, Mr. Jim Clark.
Face here at our sports view gathering. Jackie Stewart, the motor racing driver, had a great first season too in the big time.
Very pleasing, yes.
Now what about the old men, people like Hill and Clark?
Well, Hill's pretty old, but Clark's coming along. He's only 29.
You've travelled most of the way this season behind Jim Clark, Graham. What would you say is his most outstanding characteristic as a racing driver?
Well, I think getting across the line first. It's a bit irritating, actually.
Do you always know when he's behind you, Jim?
Yes, I can always recognise that moustache anywhere.
Well, gentlemen, look, seriously now, next year, change of formula, bigger engines. What does this mean to the firm of Hill and Clark?
Well, speaking as an old man, I'm rather looking forward to it. Jimmy, unfortunately, has got to use one of our engines, so just to show there's no ill feeling, I'm personally going to assemble his.
In the highly competitive arena of motorsport, only once in a while does a real driving genius emerge from the pack. One such man was Jim Clark.
Jimmy was so unlike every other racing driver I've ever known. He was very special in a whole lot of ways.
It's funny, the words that come to my mind is innocent talent.
Understand that you could be frightened.
Well, it's all part of it. If there was nothing to be frightened of there, and nothing, and no limit, any silly bugger could get in a motor car. I enjoy motor racing. I started as an amateur hobby with no idea or no intention of becoming world champion. But I was curious to find out what it was like to drive a car fast, to drive on a certain circuit, to drive a certain type of car.
But now you've found out, and in fact raked in all the honours, what's left? How do you assess your chances of reaching old age, or even middle age, if you push it any further?
Jim Clark spent most of his youth in Berwickshire on the borders of Scotland and England. This was, and still is, farming country. An unlikely place to begin a glittering career as a racing driver. Some 12,000 acres, and Jim, the only son, was fully expected to one day carry on the family business. Had he not met another local farmer's son?
I first met him at our local young farmers club. In fact, he overtook me on the way there, and I didn't know who he was, and I thought, what a blooming idiot. He was driving like a real boy racer. I used to do a little bit of club racing, and he used to come along and give me a hand. And it all developed from there.
Well, I used to go along with a friend of mine, another local farmer, he and Scott Watson, and act as his mechanic. Never thinking that I would ever even be able to get into a car, whatever, because my parents were so much against it.
I did my practice and thought I was going as quick as I could go. He went out and did his, and he was 3 seconds a lap quicker than me within 5 laps, which embarrassed me no end.
So we swapped places, and I had my first race.
We did a lot of club rallying round in the borders in the south of Scotland and the north of England.
He was just doing little club events, nothing spectacular at all. 3 or 4 pals together going to race meetings. And continued from there as he step by step went up the ladder.
He had no realization of his own ability. He said to me, "Why on earth is everybody going so slowly?" And I said, "Jim, it's not that everybody's going so slowly, it's you that are going so damn fast."
You know, I mean, let's face it, he all through my racing career has been the bloke who's kind of pushed me on.
Yes.
I mean, I wouldn't have done half as many things, you know, because I had no confidence in myself.
Jim gained a huge amount of experience racing for the local Border Reivers team. And in the summer of 1959 found himself teamed up with John Whitmore, driving a Lotus Elite in one of the most prestigious events in the world, the Le Mans 24-hour race.
I do remember him as being sort of, shall we say, from the country and a bit naive and so on and so forth, and quite endearing because of that. I don't think at the beginning he was aggressively ambitious. He just did what he did very well, and the result of that was he was in front of people.
I started out racing with no idea of ever making money at it. And it was only really at the beginning of 1960 when my father got a bit upset that I was spending so much time racing, and he suggested that his hobbies always paid themselves and so on, that made me look into the possibility of making mine pay.
The man who would take him to the next level and beyond was designer and Formula One Team Lotus manager Colin Chapman. He offered Jim a seat. Ian Scott Watson filmed his friend as they drove to the airport together. From this moment on, their lives would follow very different paths. No one could have imagined at that moment what adventures lay in store for Jim Clark. The sheep farmer's son from the Scottish borders was heading for the big time. The 1960 and 61 seasons played a key part in Clark's apprenticeship as a Formula One driver. Here, he began to mix with a host of motor racing veterans both on and off the track, soaking up knowledge wherever he could find it. He was a devoted pupil of Colin Chapman and mixed well with the small but dedicated team of Lotus engineers and mechanics.
I was very apprehensive because he was the up-and-coming star, and he was very quiet. I thought, you know, this can't be a racing driver, this very demure person, very, very shy. But there he was, and when he got in the car, he was absolute magic. He was really unbelievable.
Another British driver new on the scene was motorbike world champion John Surtees.
We both respected each other, both wanted to be quicker than each other. But you could be totally sure that he would do nothing which would endanger you at all. You could fight fair and hard.
There was good reason for gentlemanly conduct during this period. Frills or spills were all part of the sport's appeal, but safety measures and medical backup were primitive.
Were accidents pretty well every weekend, and a lot of people got killed.
In 1958, these 16 men lined up for the start of the World Championship season.
Today, 7 of those men are dead.
Jim had received a graphic lesson in the sport's dangers when he raced for the first time at the notorious Spa circuit in Belgium.
I had a pretty rough race in my own mind at Spa. I was never very happy. I was scared. I don't mind admitting it. I was scared stiff more or less all through the race. You know, you're going so bloody fast there that I was even scared to let the car slide or drift at all.
Yes.
And I was a bit, you know, I was really frightened.
But what happened at the 1961 Italian Grand Prix at Monza went way beyond frightening. Ferrari were the team to beat that year, and their leading driver, Wolfgang von Trips, was just one win away from securing the World Championship. It was only on the second lap, while Jim was dueling with von Trips, that disaster struck.
He came past me, and as he put on the brakes, he pulled over. I thought, God, you can't do this, And as he pulled over, he just pulled right into the side of me.
His wheel got in between von Trips's wheels, and the wheels touched, and it sent von Trips's car off into the crowd.
I was just behind him. And I know I went over bits and pieces and the rest of it. And it was a tragedy.
We were standing in the pits. We heard there'd been an accident. And Jimmy came back very, very shaken.
As well as von Trips, 14 spectators had also been killed. Italian police pointed the finger of blame at Clark.
It was awful, really, really awful. I mean, we couldn't get away quick enough.
He was very much affected by it. I think he felt almost powerless because the car had been impounded. He still didn't know if he was going to be heaved off to Italy and perhaps even be thrown into jail.
The Italian police were sort of after his blood, and for a time he didn't know if he'd even be able to go back to Monza. I think that it was very much a racing incident, and that it took more than one for it to happen. And it just happened to be that Jimmy was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
A full investigation of the crash eventually cleared Jim, but the incident would linger for years to come. The following season, a somewhat more reclusive, media-shy Clark returned to racing. In Colin Chapman's pioneering new Lotus, he was in with a realistic crack at the 1962 Formula One World Championship. The car was certainly quick, but in the end, it was a lack of reliability that let him down. Fellow British racer Graham Hill went on to take the title. But it was an American driver, Dan Gurney, who aroused Chapman's competitive instincts with the prospect of racing in the USA.
Chapman and Lotus and Ford got together through my connections, and next thing I knew, Jimmy was a teammate, and we got along really well.
When you see 300,000 plus people in the grandstand there, you know this, I mean, this is it.
While the big Indianapolis Roadsters have had to stop for tires and fuel, Jim Clark in his lightweight Lotus has grabbed the lead.
500 was a big race. Everybody wanted to win the 500. When he showed up there, he was outstanding, and because you could see that his cornering speeds were great. He seemed to be a natural.
He was certainly an incredible race driver. But he showed us the way. There's no question about that.
Parnelli is just 4.5 seconds ahead of the smooth-driving Clark.
Parnelli, we called him Parnoily, because his tank was leaking so much oil, and people were starting to spin and everything.
My car, 10 or 15 laps from the end, cracked a crack in the oil tank.
But Parnelli Jones finishes the 500-mile ordeal in 3 hours and 29 minutes. Scotsman Jim Clark's Lotus captures second place.
Clark had only just missed out on winning the Indy 500 at his first attempt.
But that's the way it goes. And Jimmy was not upset. I mean, if he was, he didn't show it. He was perfection when it came to being a gentleman. You know, you never lost his cool, never saw him lose his cool about anything.
By now, the pairing of Chapman and Clark was really starting to gel. They seemed a perfect match.
I think Colin Chapman had the utmost faith in Jimmy's ability to extract everything that there was in the automobile, and Jimmy had great faith in Colin Chapman for coming up with the cutting edge of technology at that time.
Colin's personal dynamism has inspired an outstanding group of draftsmen, engineers and mechanics, and has united them in a formidable team, Team Lotus.
Oh, he's just a fantastic driver. He's still young and he's still maturing. He's going to get better. He's very easy on the machinery, very easy to get along with. He's an ideal racing driver.
Chapman knew that Clark was ready to produce something special.
This combination, which developed together, became the acknowledged main threat.
The Lotus 25 was a radical design at the time, and in Clark's hands, simply unbeatable. Records were smashed at nearly every race in a season which produced some of the greatest challenges a driver could face.
A lot of very good racing drivers died in Lotuses because the Lotus was a very fragile car. But Jim Clark was so smooth that he never put too much stress on the areas of a car that would give up.
After the race, when you stripped his car down and you stripped his co-driver's car down, you could always tell which parts came off Jimmy's car and which parts came off the other driver's car, because the parts of Jimmy's car were more or less pristine.
Think for a minute that Clark was one of those drivers that could only win in a perfect car. One year at Spa, for example, he was leading the race when his gearbox started to let go. Did he give up? Nope. Instead, he drove the rest of the race, and we're talking 160 miles an hour in the wet, with one hand on the steering wheel and the other holding the gear lever in place. And he still won by nearly 5 minutes.
The big event of the day, the 16th British Grand Prix. Jim Clark's the big man this year. And now they're away, 82 laps, 246 miles in all. In the race, 23 of the biggest men in motor racing. As seems inevitable this year, Jim Clark's the first man home.
Magic season. We won 7 out of 10 Grand Prix, and no one had won that amount of Grand Prix in one season before. Everybody couldn't quite understand how this shy farmer from Scotland was such a marvellous driver, but he was.
He's a very, very tough opponent. He not only can drive quickly, but he can race. And there's that little distinction from being able to conduct a car quickly around a circuit and then race at the same time.
Now, you know Clark's listening to you up on Border TV in Carlisle. Have you anything you'd like to say to him?
Yes, I hope he goes back to farming.
Back home in the Scottish borders, the farming community could scarcely comprehend that one of their own sons had taken on the world and won. They turned out in their thousands to give him a hero's welcome. Jim's triumphant homecoming was captured on home movie camera by his old friend Ian Scott Watson.
Pretty astonished and really very excited by it. I feel that I had at least some part in his getting going.
With so much motor racing activity based in the south of England, Clark increasingly began making regular trips to London.
And Jimmy would have the big bedroom, and Helen and I would have the small bedroom. And every now and again he would bring a girlfriend in, and Helen, my wife, would be very surprised to say, "Oh, that's not the girl he had the last time."
He used to come and stay quite often when he was down in London with my wife and I. We had a little flat in Mayfair, and it became known as the Scottish Embassy because first Jimmy and then later Jackie used to come and stay there a lot.
Worst decision maker I've ever met in my life. I mean, the number of movies that we went to, we never made. You know, we would go around, "Oh, that's a good movie, but wait a minute, why don't we go and see this one and see what's on here?" By the time we got to the one that we wanted, you know, the movie had started and the box office had closed.
He just couldn't make decisions. And it was just the way he was. It was strange because I think when he got into a racing car, his whole personality changed. And he became very focused as he sat in a racing car. And he was just different sitting in a car than when he was outside the car. In those days, the top drivers would drive many, many different cars. Jimmy could jump from one car to another in very different cars and do it very effectively.
He was quick in everything, in anything he drove, so it didn't make any difference. He loved driving. I mean, you've seen pictures of him in the Cortinas, and mainly on 3 wheels.
The Lotus Cortinas had this unique quality of lifting its front wheels when you went round corners, particularly left-hand bends. The front wheel would come up sometimes 8 inches off the ground. So they were very spectacular to watch.
The 1964 racing season could never realistically match the dizzy heights of the previous year. Compromised by mechanical problems, Clark still managed 3 wins, including one at Brands Hatch in front of his home crowd. Returning to Indianapolis, he once again stunned the Americans with his pace.
Clark jets his way into the lead. The Flying Scotsman continues to pull away.
But once again, the winner's trophy would elude him. The following year, Team Lotus were back. Chapman and Clark were determined to beat the Americans on home soil.
And for the next 500 miles, each man will ride alone, doing the thing he knows best, driving a precision racing machine to win. As the pace car pulls into the pits, Jim Clark moves ahead on Foyt and pulls into the lead. Clark continues his lead, but coming out of the backstretch, A.J. Foyt passes and moves to the front. Foyt tries to press his advantage, but Clark hangs on, determined to reclaim his lead.
And it wouldn't really matter whether he was in a Lotus, whatever it might be. He was going to do well, period.
Jimmy Clark crosses the finish line to become the victor of the 1965 Indianapolis 500.
He won that race by 2 whole laps. And lots of people don't report that these days. He flew, and they saw it, and they were stunned.
Obviously, he'd been there and paid his dues, and that was the 3rd time he was there, and I think he was well deserving of it.
Jimmy Clark of Scotland becomes the first foreign driver to win since 1916.
That was it. It was all over with in the history books.
and Clark.
Who named their children after Jim Clark.
Next came photo shoots with supermodels, and Clark's face began to be seen everywhere. The mild-mannered king of speed was now an international celebrity.
The man with the biggest prize of all to defend is Jim Clark. Self-preservation would be Jim Clark, whether it Clark as part.
And I am unable to find words to express satisfactorily my appreciation.
It didn't wear well with him, the hustle and the bustle.
Monday, July the 5th, 8:15 a.m. Ahead of him, a day of engagements in the world of advertising, public relations and sponsorship. A schedule of off-track business engagements, which is often so full that a private plane becomes a necessity. In 7 days, Jim Clark travelled 3,280 miles in 3 countries and earned at least £2,500.
It's a little bit of a whirlwind at times. You get into it and it's very difficult to find time to slow down.
As ever, there was really only one place that provided Clark a shelter from the demands that were now a regular part of his life.
I'd like to get back here much more often, but unfortunately at the moment I find that racing commitments and other commitments don't allow much time. It's a great relaxation to get back here, and very much the opposite from racing. Motor racing and farming, to my mind, were in a way two opposites. The very fact that they are two opposites helps me enormously to kind of keep a sense of balance.
In a Grand Prix, he used to like to get out in front, build himself a lead, and let the other people try and get after him.
To be on the podium with Jim Clark, you know, who was my hero, was a great privilege. And it sort of became a joke that it was Batman and Robin, and there was no doubt who was Batman and who was Robin. It was my very first year in Formula One. I finished 3 times second to Jim Clark. First in the Belgian Grand Prix in torrential conditions.
I know I got a lot of the glory, but it's built up of all these people working very enthusiastically and very hard to ensure that I've got the best car possible.
He was the most important part of the team, up there with Colin. And we knew that if we could do a good job and make reliable race cars, he was going to be up front for sure.
Clark amazingly won the British Grand Prix for the 4th year in a row.
Jim Clark has won his 17th Grand Prix. The 1960...
There was little doubt by now that he was a very special driver. But what exactly was it that made him so good?
He was so smooth, he was so clean, he drove with such finesse, he never bullied a racing car, he sort of caressed it into doing the things he wanted it to do.
Power I can get on out of a corner. I don't drive any faster, I just concentrate harder, which makes me go faster.
Clark at the wheel of a Lotus. This season, an unbeatable combination.
The people of Jim's hometown would remember it for the rest of their lives too. The Scottish Borders farming community welcomed him home like a king.
Winning Indianapolis and the World Championship, I don't think anyone's done that since.
Among the guests of honor that day was Jim's family, including his father, who just 5 years earlier had told his only son to either give up his hobby or make it pay. Jim was showered with honors and awards, from Buckingham Palace to the rest of the world.
Hip, hip. Hip, hip. Hip, hip.
But Jim was never likely to be seduced by fame. When all the crowds and cameras had dispersed, he still had everything and everyone he needed.
And it would be few people where Jim Clark could totally relax with.
One such group of people included his racing driver pals Graham Hill and Jackie Stewart.
And to interview Jackie Stewart, we've invited from hospital his friend and great rival, Graham Hill.
What particular advantage has this car got over, say, the car I was driving?
Well, it's faster, Graham.
Well, I'd buy you a drink for saying that. That's fabulous.
Three of us together were terrific. I mean, we got called the Three Musketeers. We did example of how, even at the highest form of competition, you could have a human relationship with a group of people who were participants. Well, we'd go on holiday together, we'd fly to races together. We went to the Tasman series. Betty, that's Graham Hill's wife, Sally, Jimmy's girlfriend Helen, my wife, would all come out to meet us.
Some tough challenges now lay ahead for Jim as the 1967 season got underway.
Jim Clark whips the new Lotus Ford around Zandvoort in the 67 Dutch Grand Prix, breaking all lap records and giving first victory for the new car.
Clark was on winning form again that season, delighting his fans at the British Grand Prix. It was the 5th time he'd won this event. But elsewhere, mechanical gremlins returned once again. And Clark found himself retiring from races when leading the field. First, it was Belgium. Then France. And again in Canada. The frustration of scoring no points despite having the fastest car in the field was beginning to show. And a veteran like Clark also knew that when something broke in the car, it could have very serious consequences.
They were fragile. And towards the end of his career, he was beginning to become sensitive about that and more nervous about it, and perhaps a tad less trusting of Colin.
And I think that there were a few chinks appeared in that relationship.
Ironically, it was to be yet another setback at the Italian Grand Prix at Monza that elevated Clark to the stuff of legend. Forced into the pits with a puncture, he rejoined the race a full lap behind. Incredibly, he retook the lead. But on the very last lap, his car ran out of fuel. John Surtees won the race, but it was Jim who won the Italians' hearts. The last two races of 1967 produced back-to-back wins for Clark, though came too late for him to win the world title. And at the first race of the 1968 season, he established a new record of 25 wins in Formula One. Jim Clark was now officially the greatest driver the world had ever seen.
He had set up a record as good as any record of any racing driver. 25 wins and 72 starts. I mean, that is an incredible record.
I keep it in the back of my mind that I don't want to go on motor racing forever. I know one can't do that, and for that very reason I try to look at the future and see what I'm going to do once I give up motor racing. I started motor racing because I enjoyed it, and I still motor race because I do enjoy it. And it's a very difficult thing to give up or to change one's life and come back and settle down to this quiet, as it were, all the time.
Friends of Jim's remain convinced he was close to finally quitting the sport. A third and final world championship would be a spectacular way to bow out.
He, at that time, was going to be the man to beat. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
That was going to be a season to end all seasons.
There was a time, of course, when we all jumped into different cars, and Jimmy was, I do believe he wasn't really supposed to be at that race.
Fellow drivers recall he'd been frustrated with the car's lack of performance in practice, and had only been able to qualify 7th on the grid. And then, on the morning of the race, it rained.
How much does danger come into it? Or do you honestly never think about it? I think about danger.
No, I do. From time to time. Especially, if there are a lot of trees about, something like that,
Yes.
If you go off, you're going to hit them hanging hard.
Across this now overgrown stretch through a German forest, cars once raced at breathtaking speed. And it was here that Jim was tragically killed at the age of 32, when the car he was driving mysteriously crashed into trees. 4 decades later, a simple memorial ceremony is taking place nearby.
It's quite incredible because my wife said to me only the other day, why is so many people interested in Jim Clark these days?
There is only one living witness to what happened that day. Former race marshal Winfried Kolb.
Und dann kam Jim und plötzlich
Und das Auto ist über hunderte von Metern immer schön gleichmäßig geschleudert. Er ist im Winkel von etwa 45 Grad von der Strecke gerutscht und dann hier an einem Baum zerschellt. Ist in den Krankenwagen. Dann hat man auf dem Weg dorthin den Tod festgestellt.
Reports are coming in that racing driver Jim Clark has been killed whilst competing.
Nous venons d'apprendre par notre correspondant d'Allemagne que le pilote automobile Jim Clark est mort. Il participait à une course de Formule 2 au circuit d'Hockenheim.
Ik herhaal, Jim Clark is overleden.
I was at home and I turned the television on and there was a picture of Jim Clark's face and I knew instantly what had happened. He'd died.
And that's how it hit the whole world of motorsport. I mean, it was just total shock.
Very sad. As an icon had gone.
The world was never the same again.
I don't know what actually happened. It wouldn't have been a driver error. So it was something else.
Jim Lee Clark was too good a driver to have something to have that happen to him. Something had to break.
I honestly don't know. I mean, you know, the conclusion seems to be that it was a tyre.
It's reasonably common knowledge that he had a deflating rear tyre. And there was a very careful investigation of his car by aircraft crash investigators. Everything was looked into most carefully.
Whatever the cause of the crash, Jim Clark was gone. His was the first of several fatal accidents that season, and more would follow in a sport where death had become commonplace.
I think Jim Clark's loss was the one that hit everybody most. He was a big, big favourite around the world and turned out to be a legend.
His honour, including the Jim Clark revival meeting at Hockenheim. Elsewhere, the cars he once drove were still displayed.
Symbol of what motor racing and champions.
And of course, Jimmy was never to be replaced, never will be. He's
So there we have it, folks. The icon, the GOAT of motorsport, Jim Clark. On the next episode, we'll be having a look at Sir Jackie Stewart, and in episode 3, Graham Hill. If you like our video, please like, subscribe, comment and share. Thank you and have a good day.